that we're expanding our focus, not amplifying our focus from exclusively the Veterans Health Administration to the Veterans Benefits Administration. And we're very lucky to have on our steering committee, which is essentially our board, Paul Sullivan, who is a Gulf War combat veteran and an expert on VBA and VA benefits. And so we're going to kick off with Paul Sullivan talking for about 10 minutes. I'm going to try to be a serious timekeeper to all of you, and then we're going to proceed. So Paul Sullivan, you're on. Which means
you're muted, Paul.
Oh, let me start from the top again. Hello, everybody. Thank you very much, Suzanne, for your kind words. Before we begin, let's all wave and say thanks to Suzanne for the books that she's written, all her great work and advocacy for protecting and trying to expand the quality care and timely care our veterans receive at VA hospitals. And I'm glad to be on the VHPI board, as Suzanne mentioned, to add the component of veterans benefits. Because as I say all the time, and I'll say a few times here, most of the time a veteran needs to win his or her claim against VBA before he or she can receive free care at VHA. So I just want to start from that big framework. So again, my name is Paul Sullivan, and I'm here generally to give an update on the Veterans Benefits Administration. And if anybody has any questions, thank you, Jasper, for holding them until the end. Our goal, as I understand it from Suzanne, thank you, is to improve VBA. That means streamlining claims so they're faster and they're accurate, so that our veterans get faster and better care at VHA. That's how this works. And we want to make sure that the left hand and the right hand are working together so that the veteran who really doesn't know the difference most of the time between VHA and VBA can navigate the system and get the care that they need. Let me give a little bit of my background. I work at the law firm Bergman and Moore. I'm the director of outreach there. However, I'm here in my own capacity as a member of VHPI. I can't answer a lot of questions about claims. Before that, I worked at VA as a project manager, monitoring the claim activity of Gulf War veterans. And for several years, I was a deputy secretary at CalVet, that's the California Department of Veterans Affairs. So for a quick VA briefing, I always like to start at the top and then zoom in, okay? So the first item is, we all know that Biden new administration nominated and then the Senate confirmed Dennis McDonough to be the new secretary. That's great news. As I understand it, Mr. Biden trusts Mr. McDonough. They've known each other for some time, and we hope that that pays off for an improved VA. However, at the Veterans Benefits Administration, there is no confirmed leader. So there's an acting person. His name's Tom Murphy. I've probably known him for 10 years or more. And he's a nice guy, but I don't think, from what I hear, that he's going to be the permanent leader. The other place where VA processes claims is called the Board of Veterans Appeals. And there's a chairman there, and her name is Cheryl Mason. She's still there. She has a term. So that part of VA, the Board of Veterans Affairs, remains unchanged in its leaderships. Okay, as I mentioned a second ago, there are two places where VA processes claims that veterans file. The first is the Veterans Benefits Administration. VBA operates 56 regional offices. There's about one in each state, plus one in the Philippines and one in Puerto Rico. Some states, I loved it. California has 3, that's great. The second place where VA processes claims is the Board of Veterans Appeals, okay? At the regional offices, or ROs, they receive about 1.5 million claims per year. At the about 150 claim appeals per year. So let's just start off with that high level math of what's coming into the system. Now, although I'm going to mainly focus on disability compensation claims, I do want everyone to know that VBA is more than claims for disability benefits. VBA has disability compensation. Those are for medical conditions related to service. There's also a pension benefit. That's eligible for low income, low asset, totally disabled, and often older war period veterans. Then there's education and training. Everybody's heard of the GI Bill. Well, that multi-billion-dollar program is run out of VBA. Then there's another part of VBA called readiness and employment. That used to be called vocational rehabilitation or VOC rehab. Again, VBA has as its job to help veterans coming back from the war who may have been hurt or disabled, to retrain them so that they can find jobs. Now, there's another big component of the GI Bill, and that's the home loan guarantee. For those of you who don't know, a veteran can buy a home with zero money down instead of the standard 20% conventional loan. That benefit is provided by the government with the understanding that a person was in the military getting really rock bottom wages. I mean, I made a couple of $100s a month while I was in the war, okay? The government agrees to guarantee what would have been the veteran's down payment. Then there's also life insurance. Every single service member while they're on active duty has a life insurance policy. It's about $400,000. And that policy can be converted over when the person becomes a veteran, face value. But when the person becomes a veteran, then instead of the government paying the premiums, the veteran is paying the premiums. So that's the broad array of what VBA does for our veterans. So I'm just going to focus on the claims part because that's the part that gets the most attention, and it's where the veterans have the toughest time dealing with the bureaucracy. Okay, I mentioned that VBA has the 56 regional claim offices. I just spent the last couple of days, and it takes a while, adding up how many claims are pending at VBA. Now I'm going to go through some terms here, and I'm not doing this to confuse anyone. I'm just trying to go from what VA says in the press and to Congress and then compare it with the reality, okay? VBA uses a term called backlog. Right now, VBA says the backlog is about 200,000 claims. However, VA doesn't bother to tell most people that that's new claims awaiting a decision that are more than 4 months. But that word is also incomplete and misleading. If you add up all of the work, adding a dependent, a remand from the board, a remand from the court, a review, a whole host of other things, there are actually 775,000. That's almost 800,000 work items that are awaiting processing at VBA. And I want to let you know that's shot up about 100,000 in the last 2 months. Okay, now I want to segue and say there's some good news. You may have seen the $1.9 trillion Save America bill or stimulus bill. That bill, as a top priority, is going to add staff for VBA and the Board of Veterans Appeals to hire and train and scan and process veterans' claims so veterans get faster and hopefully more accurate decisions. Okay, now that we whipped through that, Suzanne and other members of the VHPI board asked me to talk about what are some of the common barriers that veterans face trying to prosecute or win a disability claim, either with, which is the nice way to say it, or against, which is the more adversarial way to say it, a claim against VA. Well, the first barrier is what I call the lack of transition. There's a myth out there in the civilian world that every veteran is automatically transitioned, like Hermione Granger and a magic wand in Harry Potter, into the VA system. That's not true. Every veteran has to do it on an individual basis. Okay? So the first barrier is the lack of a transition. The second barrier is what I call bureaucratic. And that's because, like any big building, and if anybody's been in the VA, they're all big buildings, there's more than one entrance. Okay? Most people that I speak with think that veterans somehow magically appear at VA and get care. That's not true. The veterans show up at VHA, and the veteran is often told that they're not in VHA's system, so the veteran has to fill out a VHA enrollment form, and the veteran may have to fill out a disability compensation form, or if it's a pension-related issue, the veteran may fill out a pension claim form. So there's actually 3 different ways to get into the healthcare system. There are a few others. For example, if someone served 5 years, served in a war zone, that veteran gets 5 years of free care at VA. The clock starts when that person is discharged from the military. So there's lots of different ways, but there's 3 forms that are needed. The VHA enrollment, that's called a 1010 EZ, or the claim form, or the pension claim form. Okay? That's compensation claim or pension claim. See, even I have to sort all this out when I'm talking about it all the time. All right, now let's talk about the third barrier that veterans face, and that's discrimination, and it's real. We know from VA data that there are disparities in health outcomes and claim outcomes based on race, based on gender, based on LGBTQ status, and other issues. This is serious. On a positive note, I'm actually glad to see the president and the secretary recognizing that these are barriers and trying to lower those barriers so that more veterans who earned care and benefits can receive them. Another very serious one that I can speak to with some level of expertise is the barrier for Native American veterans. There's usually no VA presence on a reservation or near a reservation for healthcare. There is no one there to help with claims at most reservations. This is a very serious issue of known deliberate discrimination for hundreds of years.
I don't see deliberate being the good cause. Good word you're using. You are misleading everybody.
I'm sorry?
I believe you're misleading everybody on your last 2 statements about people being prejudiced and being racist in the system. And what you're saying
is itself.
Bob, let's keep questions till the end.
If you wish to hold your comments till the end, Bob, that would be appreciated. I'm not related to Bob. But since I've been to reservations and I have spoken with VA leaders, most of the time they're either ignorant of the situation, they know nothing about reservations at all, or there's insufficient staff to go to the locations. I can tell you one reservation I visited, when I asked the veterans on the reservation to take me to the VA facility, it had a sign that they were only open a few hours a month. And oftentimes they didn't send anyone at all. And when veterans would call, when no one would be there, no one knew who was supposed to be there at all. So it's a systemic racism when there's insufficient resources and insufficient leaders to address that. Outreach and care and benefits for Native Americans is a very real issue. I was honored to be asked by NCAI and the Senate Committee on Indian Affairs and the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee to write a very detailed report on the problems on reservations. And that report was used as part of the information, among many others, to create, and this is good news, the first time a Native American Veteran Advisory Committee for the Secretary of Veterans Affairs. That's absolutely fantastic. There has not been a seat for Native Americans at the table at VA. That's a serious problem. Now, to continue on, it's really important that these situations where veterans face barriers, where it's a lack of transition, not understanding the bureaucracy, or there may be discrimination involved, that the veteran try to get assistance from a VSO. In this case, I see Swords to Plowshares on the call, the American Legion. There are great VSOs out there that where the veteran sits down with them, they can make sure the correct form is filled out, submitted to the right location with the right evidence to make sure a veteran can get the care and the benefits that they earn. So it's real important because the statistics that VA, VBA, the board and the court put out, that when a veteran has an advocate, the outcome is better for the veteran in terms of a faster decision and more likely to be approved. All right. I want to talk about 3 other issues that my friend at VHPI asked me to discuss. The first is the 48-hour claim review. The second is the privatization of VA C&P exams. And the third is a brand new report by VA's Inspector General outlining severe problems with training of VA employees who process claims. So let's take these in order. Let's talk about the 48-hour rule. Since the 1950s, yes, that's 70 years ago, VA has collaborated with VSOs when a VA rating decision was in draft form. The VBA would allow the accredited VSO co-located in a VA regional office to review on an informal basis that draft decision, and if there were errors, to have them quickly corrected. And by the way, the errors identified by the VSOs were never reported in any VA standardized review of the process of how claims are handled at a regional office. But anecdotally, that's all I have. And speaking with the VSOs over the years, they tell me that it's quite frequent that a service officer looking at a draft VA decision will find a mistake. The regional office will correct it. And why is this important? Is because if the mistake was a denial, an incorrect denial, and the service officer spotted it, then that decision becomes a grant. When the veteran has the grant of service connection, that opens the door to VHA care. So this informal 48-hour review that VSOs are performing is a great help to veterans and VA. It opens the door a little bit better to access for benefits and care. What happened though was last year, the previous administration stopped the 48-hour review. The VSOs protested, and full disclosure, Bergman and Moore is the law firm representing the VSOs. They're trying to get it reinstated. The hope here is that the new administration will restore the 48-hour review of draft VA rating decisions and thus improve the quality of the claims. That's all we really want. At the end of the day, we want to make sure that veterans have accurate claim decisions so they get the care and benefits they need. Now let's shift to VA privatizing compensation and pension exams. In most cases, when a veteran files a disability claim, the VA wants to make sure that the veteran has the condition, the severity of the condition, and if to be asked to issue an opinion by a medical provider, is that condition related to the veteran's military service? Okay, well, what's happened in the last few years is that overwhelmingly, and I don't know, Suzanne, you can answer this if I'm not correct, almost all of them are now being privatized. And what that means is it takes longer, it's more expensive, and it's fragmented. Let me give you an example of a veteran with traumatic brain injury. A traumatic brain injury claim will require several different evaluations, mental health, neurological, a whole bunch. Those C&P exams, if they were done by VA in a VHA facility could all be done at once. It's easier for VHA, it's easier for the veteran, it's faster, everybody wins. However, when that C&P exam for TBI is privatized, it may go out to multiple providers who may require a veteran with TBI to make multiple trips to multiple exams. That's not in the best interest of the veteran. Plus, it's more expensive and it takes longer. So the hope here is that C&P exams won't be privatized and they will be brought in-house where the VA examiner has cultural competency. They've been helping veterans for years or decades. They know some of the terms that the veteran might use to describe what happened to them in the military while they're doing the veterans exam. So restoring C&P exams back to VHA would be a good idea.
Would be going backwards in time.
Yes. And now the last thing I wanted to review, and thanks for asking me to do this, Suzanne, is a new report by VA's Office of the Inspector General. This report came out March 3rd, and it found that VA is doing a poor job with training and oversight of training. And when folks were found not to have passed the training, the supervisors weren't held accountable. What that means is, look, overall VBA works well. Most of the decisions are processed correctly. However, when the VA OIG can come in and see that claims processors are not properly trained and there's no oversight and accountability, what does that mean for the veteran? It means that the VA might make a mistake on the claim. And what happens when VA makes a mistake on a claim? Then the veteran is forced to appeal. Then the veteran may wait additional months or years in the review and appeal process at VA, and that's not fair to the veteran. Right now in this crisis, we want to make sure that veterans are getting quick and accurate claim decisions so the veteran can get quality and fast VA care. So let me wrap all this up and say that all of these things that I've discussed are intertwined. VA's forms are complicated. There are barriers to VA. There are transition issues for VA. We've mentioned the 48-hour review. We've mentioned the increase in the number of claims pending at VA. All of these come together. And what's needed at VBA when there's a new leader is for someone to look at the totality of VBA and see how VBA works with VHA so that VBA and VHA are better integrated, so a veteran has a seamless process in dealing with VA. That's the goal here. We don't want to leave anybody behind on a paper trail or in the bureaucracy. I really think that these things are doable, and they're doable when you put people who are competent and who care in leadership positions to make it happen at VBA. So that wraps up all of my comments. Thank you. And I guess we're going to turn this over to Isam and other folks to comment further on VBA.
Yeah, so thank you, Paul. And I want to emphasize what Paul has emphasized to me many times is that this, broken door at VBA serves the interests of folks who really don't want to pay the cost of war, which is, the cost of staffing the VBA and training, because all of this doesn't happen by magic. It happens with funding and staffing. And I think that's where we're going to go to next, which is with Elliot Friedman from AFGE, because very often when you read stories in the newspaper or you talk to individual veterans, they will say that the story will conclude, that, oh, these people don't really care, that Joe Smith over there who's processing a claim doesn't care, or the VA doesn't care. And I'm sure there are callous people in the VA like there are callous people everywhere, but the problem really isn't a caring problem. It's a resource problem. And to shift it to a caring problem, which I think Elliot is going to explain to us, is to, just suggest that if you just got enough caring people, they could somehow, you could even restrict resources because, they would care so much, they would, I don't know, wield some magic. And I think Elliot Friedman from AFGE, American Federation of Government Employees, who deals with VBA, is going to help us understand, the extraordinary workload and productivity pressures that are on employees that make it impossible for the most caring person on earth to care. So Elliot, would you help us understand that?
Absolutely, Suzanne. Thank you for having me. Thank you to you, Jasper, and VHPI for hosting today. Really appreciate the opportunity to dive into VBA, which is often the overlooked portion of VA, and I think understanding its complexities, and especially with everything that Paul laid out on a factual basis of just the very, very complex bureaucracy of what we're dealing with and working with, the context really is valuable to understanding veterans' access to the VA. I also want to just start out with some larger context. AFGE represents over 240,000 individuals, employees at the VA. We believe 30% of those individuals are veterans themselves. So the VA workforce is very highly populated by veterans. And within VBA in particular, we believe the number is 40%, and that it is an extraordinarily high number of veterans who, after their discharge, want to continue to serve, continue to carry out the mission, and serve fellow veterans as they want to get the veterans that they have fought for and earned. Sorry, Paul raised some very interesting points that I will address later, but I also wanted to start with two things. One, it very much is the gateway or the bottleneck or the broken door. All of these analogies I think are accurate depending on the story. But if you don't get in through VBA, the promise of VHA and the benefits that you've earned and pensions that you've earned are locked. So making sure that this door is swinging open when it needs to, that it's not too complex, is critical. And I say this when I'm about to get into performance standards, but as I said, my members are many, many veterans themselves. We want to treat veterans like warriors and not widgets. And unfortunately, the VA often prevents us from doing that. So starting off, I do want to talk about performance standards related to claims production within VBA. I also want to say that Paul had a very good point there, illustrating the way that claims are stretched through the system, in that one might be the backlog, one might be inventory, and then he said several other terms. And the way that the VA can very, very much run out the clock that it has in each one of those categories before a backlog is to set or is to begin through the various stages of the process is very, very deceitful. It's very hard to understand, and I don't want to say deceiving, but it is very much truly using technical terms to almost obfuscate how long a claim has been there and how long a claim could go. There are certainly an example of a claim going through any one of a number of steps, running out the clock of each step, but still theoretically being on time while it runs out the clock in each step, versus being late in one particular step and then being delayed. So you have to be very, very careful with understanding that. But going back to the workers and the people I proudly represent, both in VBA and in the veteran and BVA, the Board of Veterans Appeals, production standards place their emphasis on quantity, much less to a degree on quality. And I would like to talk with the inequality between claims. To the VA, an issue is an issue is an issue within a claim. So if you have veteran A who has a specific claim that is, I'm just going to say, is related to audiology. This veteran served on an aircraft carrier like the one behind Bob and was on the deck every day and claims that he lost his hearing or hard hearing from directing jets in a war zone. That's one claim. If somebody, God forbid, has a TBI, as Paul said earlier, and which requires much more complexity, or even, God forbid, an MST, that issue is weighted the same. So if a veteran has 10 issues on one claim, those are worth a certain amount of points to my members in meeting their production standard. If a veteran has one claim that is MST or TBI, each one of those claims is worth the same, and it makes it significantly harder for my members to give the attention that each veteran deserves for their own unique circumstance. So we think that things need to be much more tailored. Prior to my ever working for AFGE or being involved in the VA space, and prior to the implementation of the National Work Queue, which is a system that moves claims around from different regional offices to different regional offices, you used to have something called the 3 different lanes. And one of them was called the express lane. And this would be for that veteran who had 1 or 2, and I don't use the term easy claim to cast a doubt on a veteran service, but less complex and easier to process claims. That would be the express lane. Maybe a newer claims processor would be the ones doing that. Then you would have the intermediate lane, somewhere between 3 and 10 different claims, and the ability for somebody who has more issues to work with, but nothing necessarily crazy, or maybe one hard thing. And then you had your special ops lane, and this would be your TBI, your MST, your toxic exposure potentially, or something really, really complex, or a veteran who has more than 10 claims and is severely disabled. In the old days, somebody who was working on those specialty claims, regardless of how many specific issues were addressing that veteran was addressing, would be given more credit. Now, probably one of the most, if not the most recent person to graduate from high school here, but for those of you who have been dealing with GPAs of yourselves or your children or your grandchildren, if you take an AP class or an honors class, you get extra points on your numerator to offset the difficulty of the work. VA used to grade on a curve, our members. They have since gotten rid of that and treated an issue as an issue as an issue, and really disproportionately affected what would be considered a claim that is easy to resolve or not, depending on the workload. So my members will tell you the single biggest problem that they are facing in successfully performing their job is meeting these performance standards, which are, again, designed to treat warriors like widgets and not like the veterans that they are. So that's point 1 that I'd like to talk about. Point 2, the other thing I would also like to say is, and this is 2 other things on that actually. 1, deferrals and saying something is not ready. If a VSR is the one who assembles the work, does the initial production, and sends it off with a decision of whether it's ready to rate or not. The rating veteran service representatives then makes a decision, and it continues to go up the chain. If the rating veteran service representative says that to the VSR, this isn't right, this isn't ready, it needs more time, and sends it back up into the cloud, which is the National Work Queue, the member, the RVSR, who spent all that time doing that, gets no credit. You only get credit when you make a determination, which is awful because it effectively incentivizes you to do something quickly, right, or hopefully right. But if you're not going to get credit for the work you do, it's extraordinarily problematic. Also, talking about the National Work Queue, I will say that prior to its invention, VSRs and RVSRs and claims generally stayed within one regional office, ideally where you were from. So a veteran in Philadelphia would go to the Philadelphia regional office, but now it could be done anywhere. It also would be that if I was the VSR and Paul was the RVSR and I made a mistake in the claim, or I didn't give it information, or yet Paul had a question about my work, Paul could walk down to the cube or message me on the computer and say, Elliot, what's up? What is this? And I could very quickly say, oh, I messed that up, or oh, here's the answer, or oh, I thought of it this way. And it would get resolved right then and there. Now, with the National Work Queue and the way that the system is set up, it gets sent back up into the cloud, not necessarily back to me. Somebody fixes it, and it doesn't necessarily go back to Paul, who caught the error. So Paul spent hours and hours working on this claim, will get no credit. Somebody else could get it, and it could be done in 5 seconds. But because somebody else might be reading it for the very first time, they have to go through it all again to make sure that they're understanding it correctly. Whereas if I had my name on the case and Paul had his name on the case, and you could follow up with me and I can answer a quick question, it would help both of our productions, it would help both of our abilities to do our job better, and it would serve the veterans more efficiently. So I'm sorry I'm getting into the weeds here, but this is a very weedy situation. Not that I'm by any means a gardener. And lastly, I also want to talk about excluded time. And we will also, I'll talk about this a little bit more with IT later, but just so you understand, excluded time is if my computer crashed or I have a blackout in the facility and I'm supposed to meet, I'm just going to say 8 points per day, if an 8-hour workday, a point per hour, great. If the computer system shut down for 2 hours and I could not do my job, you would hope that I would get 2 hours worth of excluded time, which would reduce my denominator of work down to 6 for the day. It is not necessarily guaranteed that you get that. It is very much up to the determination of your individual manager, which is misapplied depending on what your facility is. And I'm sure everybody's heard this cliche. If you've been to one VA, you've been to one VA. If you've been to one RO, you've been to one RO. So we're going to get back to excluded time in a minute, but there are significant problems with technology. Next, actually, we're going to go there right now. The amount of different software systems that my members have up on their screen all day, every day is significant. You've got VETAS, you've got VBMS, you've got Microsoft Word, you've got your access to the national work queue itself, you've got your messenger to talk to your colleagues or your boss or your supervisor or your coach, and you're potentially talking to the veteran themselves. There's a lot of work that is going on your computer, and shocking, as you may find this, the VA does not necessarily provide the most current and up-to-date computers, hardware, and software for my members to use. So I actually want to, I don't know if there are any VSOs on the call, particularly those who are related to the independent budget, but if you want to look at the independent budget, which is provided by several of the larger legacy VSOs, they make recommendations on what VA should be funding annually in their appropriations. One of the bullets on their, bullets or line items on their list was a significant infusion of money into VBA up front instead of repairing legacy systems to develop more comprehensive current systems that would actually work. Now, that's on a regular pre-COVID basis. Now, thank you to Jasper right there with the link to it in the chat. Now, I also want to say this is what's happened in COVID. So obviously, VBA employees are not the ones interacting with veteran patients, so they are largely been teleworking, thank God. It was not automatically that at the beginning of COVID, but that's a separate issue. But we've got tens of thousands of workers working from home doing this work. Ironically, not ironically, but at a higher and faster production rate than they were prior to COVID while they were in the office. People have been working harder and better and more efficiently. However, one of the problems that happens, and I'm going to stay here on the East Coast for a second and say that if you are in the regional office in Massachusetts or in Baltimore or in Philly or in Pittsburgh, and you start your day at 8:30 or 9 a.m., you're working on your claims, you're processing the work, you get ready to log out of your system at noon for lunch, you don't have to because you've already been kicked out of your system. And the reason for that is that the system logs you out because everybody on the West Coast is logging in at that point, and the system can't handle all the RAM. So it's not that we can't have everybody equipped to work. Thank you, Suzanne. It's significantly problematic, and the IT does need work. And I'm sorry I'm getting carried away, but this is fun to talk about with an audience that cares. I also want to quickly talk about performance standards in the call centers. This is one of the most egregious examples. My members who are legal administrative specialists who literally answer the calls for veterans and provide them with information have a cap on the amount of time that they can speak to a veteran, depending on their GS level. So this is abhorrent in my mind, because if a veteran has specific issues, they should not be rushed off the phone, and we should not be incentivized to get them off the phone. The worst examples of this would include a first notice of death call where the veteran's spouse is informing the VA that the veteran died. There's a whole script we need to go through and gather information to. Impossible to do in the limited amount of time. It doesn't matter if a veteran has 1 question or 10 questions. To the VA there, a call is a call is a call. It doesn't matter if we're talking to a veteran who's of a senior age and served in World War II or Korea and is hard of hearing. And then the most egregious example in my mind is of the young GI who's just getting out of service and has a question about his or her college benefits or a program that they want to get involved in. And my member might know the perfect thing that they should be applying to, but they're already running up on their time limit, and the VA would incentivize them and suggest that they not say something so they keep the production down, so they keep their time down, and it doesn't negatively impact their average. As we have been, I know we have a lot of other things to do. I just want to quickly point out that on the 48-hour rule, we support that being reinstated legislatively or administratively. If the error is caught, my members, it doesn't negatively impact their production. So everybody's on the same page here. And then lastly, as far as CMP exams, we have been fighting this battle tooth and nail. I also want to say that if anybody noticed in HR 7105, which was enacted into law, the Roe Isaacson bill of last Congress, the VA is prohibited from lowering the number of CMP professionals prior to where it was of March 1st of 2020 due to the backlog that was caused by COVID, and that freeze on the number of FTE, so the FTE floor, cannot be alleviated until such a time as the backlog was prior to COVID. I will also lastly say that this does not mention IDES exams, which are the exams that somebody would literally take, which is a CMP exam, which somebody would take instead of years later when they're making a claim, literally as they're getting out of the military and hopping off of the battleship at Norfolk. Somebody could get the exam right then, which effectively would catch whatever issues are currently available and get them immediately into the system. It is a very similar and related type of exam, if not identical, but it is a different program. So the way that the employees assigned to it are separate. And I am probably way over my time. I'm sorry.
Okay, no, thank you. And I just want to say that we usually do these in an hour, but because of the number of speakers and because the information is so important, we are going to go over the hour, obviously, for questions. So if folks want to stay, obviously, if you want to leave at 11, I'm sorry, at wherever you are, if you want to leave at the top of the hour, but I think the speakers will stay for questions because we're not going to be able to get questions in speakers. And clearly, Elliot, one of the solutions to this problem is not only more staff, but getting staff involved and working with management to look at how work is done, which is, of course, a way that very few places do it, but that most should do it. We are going to ask Issam Attia, who is an Iraq War veteran and a member of our steering committee, to talk about his experience with outsourced CNP exams. So Issam, could you speak, please?
Absolutely. Thank you, Suzanne, and thank you for having me here. Thanks, everybody, for being here. As Suzanne mentioned, I served in the U.S. Army, deployed to Iraq twice between 2003 and 2006. And sustained, some injuries that I eventually had to get looked at. One of the things, though, that I'm going to discuss is that, I entered the VA system sort of backwards as compared to many people here, and that sort of this glass door, this broken door scenario. Because of being an Iraq War veteran, I was entitled to VA healthcare for 5 years for free, as Paul Sullivan had explained, and didn't need to go through the VBA in order to get the healthcare side of things. That being said, though, there still is a major transition issue as a veteran getting out of the military and getting hooked up with that system. Nobody really told me what that process was. Somebody just told me kind of like, hey, the VA is out there. You should sign up because you'll get the care. And on the DoD side of things, there is not there's nobody to speak to, no office to go to, and nobody on base in order to help you, set that up. I had to basically go to New York, where I moved for school, wander into my local VA hospital, kind of lost and not knowing what I was doing, go ring a bell on a desk and start asking questions. And eventually I was given some forms to fill out and was able to, process into the system and start receiving my benefits. During that time, I really noticed that the VA sometimes from the veteran's perspective does seem to be a bit of a black box. There is not a lot of communication to the veteran as to what his entitlements are despite being filled with maybe people who care, there are systems in place that don't exactly let the veteran know what they're capable of taking advantage of, or what, like I said, what their entitlements are. I did not know that the VBA was actually really a thing for quite a number of years. When I first went to get seen for mental health and PTSD issues, I was basically turned away. And then I had to go back a number of times to sort of force myself on them to say, like, listen, I really need to speak to somebody about what I've experienced and what I've gone through. It took a better part of a decade to eventually get admitted into that system. At which point I was finally confronted with the fact that, listen, you should really consider applying for benefits through the VBA. That, of course, did not come from the VA. The VA had been dealing with me for 10 years. At no point did the VHA say that, hey, by the way, we're seeing you for this. You're entitled to benefits through the VBA. That communication never takes place. It had to come through, somebody on the outside, and it happened to be, another veteran who knew somebody that used to work in the VBA, like Paul Sullivan, who does help veterans now with claims. And I mean, and this sort of like, who's who of trying to figure out how to get into this system. And I eventually met this advocate, and she and I spent the better part of 6 months working on my paperwork, because it's actually quite complicated. Not only do you need this person because you really have no idea where to go because the bureaucracy is so layered, but you need to know what documents you need to bring. You need to show evidence. You need to pull your medical records. You need to get testimonials from you and your family, your parents, your siblings, people that you served with. You need to have logs of all of the times that you've had issues with certain with whatever your issues are, whether it's migraines or nightmares or whatever the issues are. And you need to compile these dozens of pages of paperwork, and then not only just fill them out in a Microsoft Word document, but then you need these special, VA forms where do you get those? You need somebody that really knows how to navigate this to help you get through the system. So the bureaucracy is big and complicated and needs to be boiled down. Now after you submit your claim, I managed to submit my claim, which I believe would have been considered one of the more complex claims, in the old system at the very beginning of 2020. And I only just got my final decision letter on February 18th, 2021. So this process took me an entire year. And in that process, I have an entire folder here of decision letters that have come over the course of the year for different things. During that process, I had to go to multiple comp and pen exams. The comp and pen exams, there were precisely 4 comp and pen exams that took place at 3 different facilities in 2 different cities. Now, I happen to live right next to a VA hospital in Manhattan at the time, and I don't know why I couldn't just walk 2 blocks to the hospital to get seen, but I had to go to the other end of the island, then I had to go to Brooklyn, then I had to go to DC, and then I had, and then I had to go back to New York for something else, so it ended up being a fully insane process by which they only compensate you something like 27 cents a mile for your, I don't know what the exact number is, but it's sub $1 per mile for your efforts to travel, these distances to these places, which if you have a car, of course, does not cover the cost of gas. And if you're on public transit, probably doesn't cover that either. But anyway, that being said, when I did get to my comp and pen exams, it was pretty classic, government bidding situation where the government is generally speaking, taking the lowest bidder. Either the location was in the middle of nowhere and was very difficult to get to, the location was totally run down, the location was filthy, or the location had dead cockroaches on the floor. All of these things were things that I experienced in my attempt to go through these comp and pen exams. Now, the staff was friendly and cordial, but you didn't make up for the hassle and the filth of the place. One of the things, from my own personal experience in Iraq, one of the things that I dealt with was, exposure to, combat, and I was being seen for PTSD. And one of the things that, because these physicians are not dealing with me directly on a daily basis, they don't know the issues that I'm facing, they need to come up with ways to try to recreate the scenarios by which you might, be experiencing, flashbacks or whatever. And in my instance, they literally staged a situation to scare the hell out of me in the office so that they could see how I would respond in this situation to determine whether or not I was in fact, triggered by these sorts of scenarios. So I do very much believe in Paul Sullivan and in what he said, that these comp and pen exams need to be brought back within the VA system. I think this system that we've used is clearly a handout to private industry that needs to be reeled in. On the vocational rehabilitation front, that is another area where I have experienced how these metrics that the VBA puts in place makes it quite difficult for the veteran to also get service. So I have been dealing with the vocational rehabilitation process. I've been applying to graduate school, and because of the time it has taken for me to hear back from grad school, and my name has been on a roster without any status updates, I got an email just 2 or 3 days ago, actually, from my representative saying, we need to remove you from our caseload because it looks as though we are not helping veterans if you stay here without having a decision. And I said, well, hold on a second. I'm just waiting for a decision from a school and then we can move forward. And she said, doesn't matter. I'm taking you off and then you can start this whole process over again. So in the act of them trying to have metrics that show that they're helping veterans, they are in fact making it more difficult for veterans to get the benefits that they need. And as a member of VHPI, as a veteran, I think it's extremely important that we streamline this process. I think from my experience, and I think I'm obviously preaching to the choir, I know there's a lot of veterans in this audience, but from my experience, and I believe that of others, the VHA and the VBA very much operates like an insurance agency, and I think we need to learn, or we need it to function more like an entitlement agency. Thank you.
Thank you, Isam. I just want to clarify the places that you went where you got cockroaches and so forth. These were privatized, outsourced comp and pen exams. Is that the case?
That's correct. Yes.
Thank you. So I'm really sorry. This has been a very wonderful and informative session. And I haven't stopped people because I didn't want to, because they were talking about very interesting things. So the last person is Mo Sider, and Mo, I'm going to ask you to, Mo is with Swords to Plowshares, Maureen Sider, and she's going to talk about a very concrete way that we can help. It's one piece of the puzzle, only one, in making this process better. And Mo, would you take it away, please?
Sure. I just want to quickly say that, so I'm Mo Sidor. I work at Swords to Plowshares. I direct the legal unit. We're a team of about 7 lawyers at this point and 2 support staff, and we represent veterans before the VA and their claims and in the discharge upgrade process at DoD. And everything that Elliot and Assam have shared, I mean, not that they need corroboration, but is exactly the experience that our team has on a regular basis trying to deal with the VA benefit system. The national work queue has just made everything so much harder. There doesn't seem to be anybody on the other end who knows very much about our client's case. When we have hearings, when we try to advocate on their behalf, we're always talking to a new person every few weeks about the same case, and they're all trying to get up to speed on what the client's issue is. We are no longer, since COVID, receiving any copies of any decision letters or any development letters. So we're just relying on our clients, all of whom are very low income, vulnerable. Many of our homeless do not have cell phone minutes to call their lawyer every time a decision comes in. And so, we don't hear until 6 months later, and we've lost 6 months of a 12-month appeal window to do anything to help them on that. I've been to C&P exams with vets, and yes, can corroborate the terrible facilities that often they're conducted in. And I would say, in addition, in it to the, the lowest bidder issue and the facilities not being great, the doctors also don't seem to be that great. Just a couple of weeks ago, we got a decision, and this is going to be a bit graphic, so I apologize, but we had a decision on an MST case where the veteran experienced waking up and having his roommate ejaculating on his face. And the CMP examiner said that he doesn't have PTSD because that does not qualify as a criterion A stressor according to the DSM-5's definition of PTSD. That's not a sexual trauma. I kid you not. So I don't know where these people went to medical school, but it is from start to finish an incredibly frustrating experience, and it has only gotten more frustrating. I've been doing this work since 2014, and it's just only getting more frustrating. All right, but I am here to talk to you about one issue in particular. Thank you, Suzanne. It's character of discharge determinations. It's the process at the VBA whereby they get to decide whether somebody with a less than honorable discharge gets in the door. So if you have an honorable or a general discharge, that's not going to prevent you from getting VA healthcare, VA compensation, pension, and the like. But if you have anything worse than that, the VA gets to make a decision about whether to let you in the door. There's an advocacy moment there where we can do some persuading, and that's what our attorneys do. So for many years, we've been doing this kind of work. We've realized that in this process, many veterans are getting excluded for very minor misconduct and very unjust reasons. And so many years ago, 6 at this point, we petitioned the VA for rulemaking, asking them to revise the rules, the regulations that they use to determine who gets in the door and who doesn't. And why is this an issue that we've focused on? This is an incredibly vulnerable veteran population. Those who have less than honorable discharges, who are excluded from VA, they have much higher rates of homelessness, death by suicide, suicidal ideation. There's a significant amount of shame and stigma attached to having a less than honorable discharge, and higher rates of incarceration. And there are also significant injustices in these cases. The vast majority of the clients that we're serving at Swords to Plowshares in this process have a mental health condition that began on active duty, that you can causally link that to the misconduct. So they've come back from a deployment, they're struggling with PTSD, they test positive for marijuana, they get kicked out with an other than honorable. They experience a sexual trauma in service, they want to get away from the perpetrator, they go AWOL for a few days, they get kicked out with a less than honorable discharge. This is the common scenario. And it's backed up by government reports that found that 62% of service members who were kicked out with what are called bad paper discharges or less than honorable discharges were diagnosed on active duty with a mental health condition or TBI. That's 62% get kicked out who have a known mental health condition by the government. There are also disparities amongst eras. If you're a recent era veteran, you're much more likely to get kicked out with a less than honorable discharge than those who served during World War II in Korea. There's also disparities based on branch. The Marine Corps separates 10% of their service members with an other than honorable discharge, which is likely going to preclude them from care at the VA. The Air Force, it's less than 0.5%. So whether you served in the Marines or the Air Force is going to determine whether you get care at the VA. It's clearly not how the system should be set up. Race is another component we've seen. Studies have shown that Black airmen and Black soldiers respectively are 70 and 60% more likely than their white counterparts to face punishment through the military justice system or non-judicial punishment, which of course has a direct correlation to whether or not they're going to get bad paper. And there's also huge disparities amongst the regional offices as to who's at the rates of success for folks in this process. So I'll give you an example. The Oakland Regional Office approves about 40% of these character of discharge cases. The Milwaukee office, about 6%. The Massachusetts office, 30%. The New York office in Albany, 5%. So it's all over the map. We have a federal administrative system that apparently, depending on where your application gets sent, is going to determine whether or not you're in the door or not. Lastly, I want to just quickly mention a lot of the research that we did when we put together our petition to the VA to revise these regulations included a look at the congressional history of the 1944 Congress, who passed the GI Readjustment Act that defined a veteran as somebody who served, who was discharged rather under other than dishonorable conditions. And what did Congress mean by that definition. And what did they mean when they told the VA, yeah, you can let people out, keep people out if they have a bad discharge or not. And what we found is that they knew about these administrative discharges, these other than honorable discharges. There was conversation that was happening on the Congress floor saying that we don't want to exclude these folks. That would not be justice. We need to be giving veterans the benefit of the doubt. We need to structure this system to let these folks in the door because we know there are wounds of war that have caused them to have this misconduct, and we need to give them the benefit of the doubt. And yet today, what the VA has done is excluded, hundreds of thousands of vets for very minor misconduct, even when we can show that there's a link between the MST, between the combat trauma, et cetera. They're still getting kicked out, or they're still being excluded rather. So what we've done is we've petitioned the VA for rulemaking, and what happened was we had a meeting with them early last year asking them to make some movement on this petition. It had been pending for so many years. We got an invitation from the House Veterans Affairs Committee, where I and one of the partners that we're working on this with at Harvard Law School testified before Congress about this issue. And the very next day after the congressional subcommittee meeting, the VA finally issued proposed regulations in response to our petition. That was in July. And unfortunately, what they've proposed is not very different than what exists currently. And so we saw, basically, again, by default, these other than honorable veterans are being excluded despite what Congress intended. Very vague and complicated regulations still that we think are going to continue to confuse adjudicators at the VA and continue to result in these unjust, arbitrary decisions that we're seeing already. So we've responded by submitting both a public comment in a formal capacity addressing all the issues that we are taking with the proposed language. And then when the administration change happened, a few days after Dennis McDonough was confirmed, we submitted a letter to him and others high up at VBA and the Office of General Counsel, basically recapping all of our arguments that we've been making for many years. And we got a significant number of signatories on that, of a lot of law professors, attorneys who are doing this work, and other veterans advocates and advocates for homeless veterans, basically trying to show a strong showing of support that this is a huge issue. They got to do better by these folks. And, it's the population of vets who are very much in need, those struggling with mental illness, those who are, not receiving homelessness services, those who don't have access to healthcare, who don't have the financial safety net for their service-related disabilities or wartime pension. Those most vulnerable are getting the door shut on them. And it's unjust to see as a practitioner and to see our clients go through, and just trying to make some systemic changes there so that the VA can create some new rules that are going to create hopefully an inclusive and more just system than what we currently have.
Thank you, Mo. I would like to open this up for questions. And Jasper, I'm sorry, I haven't been really paying attention to the chat. Maybe it's because I am 75 and not as good at multitasking as younger people. But
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
Sure.
Yeah, there were a lot of good questions. One of them was about VHA and VBA and the disconnect there. Chris North was talking about, VHA telling veterans to file these claims, but not really giving them much direction on where to go, on how to do it, on whether to speak with a service officer inside a veteran service organization. So I think Chris's main point was, VHA talks about claims, but they often don't know exactly what they're talking about. And perhaps some of the problems stem from that disconnection. So does anyone want to talk at all about that and maybe how to improve the coordination there?
Hi, Jasper. If I can, I'll hop right in. What's really important first is to let a veteran know that he or she is not alone. It can be a very daunting prospect for the veteran walking in a VHA facility for the first time. So the first thing to do for veterans is to go to the welcome desk and ask if there's any groups that can help them with their claim. Some of the bigger facilities have now trained their front desk staff to ask if it's the first time that someone's been there, and then refer that first time veteran to the VSO office so that different things can happen simultaneously, that the healthcare people can try to set up an appointment, and then the advocate for the veteran, like from the Legion or the VFW or DAV or whatever group, can help the veteran start to fill out the claim so that the veteran's presence in the facility can be used to its utmost to try to get an appointment and then fill out and submit forms as best as possible. The biggest trick is just telling veterans you're not alone. Ask for help. Make sure it's from an accredited organization. One thing, as a slight tangent, we want to make sure that there's this growing body of what I call predatory claim sharks. And these are for-profit companies charging veterans thousands of dollars up front in fees to help the veteran file a claim. I would highly recommend that veterans not go with such a group because they don't know the claim process. They're not accredited by VA. They're not attorneys. And this for-profit group is basically going to take their money. So it's tough to educate this new consumer veteran of VA services. So asking for help is the best first start.
Great, thank you. And Christina in the check, she talks about how DAV really helped get her claim substantiated. So again, yeah, the VSOs are there to help you and really try to connect with them as in the process as you can. Next, we have Dan Shea, who's a vet out of Oregon and an activist. Dan, what's your question?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. First of all, I just wanted to say I want to thank Paul for raising the issue about discrimination on the Native American tribes reservations. In fact, when we were doing our lobbying in Washington last year, just before COVID, we met with Deb Haviland, who's now an appointee of Biden up for that. And we met while we were trying to meet with her. There was a Native American. He's called the governor of his pueblo in New Mexico. And he was a Marine, and I being a Marine, we began talking. And he told me that they had an office there that was shabby, that wasn't being taken care of for veterans, and nobody showed up. There's nobody to take care of them. So I just want to say that was something that I got directly from one of the governors of the Pueblo in New Mexico. And so I wanted to relate that was actually true. I'm outside, so you might be hearing a plane overhead. The other is that one of the things when we keep talking about this issue, I want to know how we can make the VA, the Veterans Administration, the healthcare, that any veteran who comes back, I don't care what their disability is covered by the VA. We're talking about on a wide basis, a Medicare for all here in Oregon and all over the United States. I would like to see a VA for all, at least for veterans, and a Medicare for all, side by side. No Betty being disqualified. That way we're going to take care of the mental health and care of all veterans. And that's what I would like to see is how we're going to put that forward. Is anybody even putting forward a bill like that? Thank you.
Great, thanks, Dan. Who wants to take that one?
I would like to jump in and say that at VHPI, we really are for essentially that in the VA, that, one of the problems is why are there all these complex eligibility requirements? You have to prove this, you have to prove that. You have an OTH, you can't get this. You have a general, you can't get, you can't get the GI Bill. I mean, people sign up to serve their country. They should be allowed to get, they are promised these benefits. They should be allowed to get them. We believe at VHPI that
I hope Suzanne is okay.
discharges with veterans discharge, with the general discharges, and that the income and disability, service related disability requirements should not be there. End of story, you know? You shouldn't have to prove it. And I just want to make one other point, because I think this can be lost in the shuffle. That we focus on the VBA and the VHA here because we are a Veterans Healthcare Policy Institute, but a lot of these problems begin with the DOD. The VA didn't decide to discharge a veteran with an other than honorable discharge because they dared to report a military sexual trauma. The VA didn't set up a system of, you know, complicated exclusions. You know, the VA didn't set up a system where active duty service members aren't told to go to the doctor, are discouraged from going to the doctor, right? I mean, the DOD doesn't just not tell you what you need to do to get into the VA. The DOD military culture actually discourages you from doing what you need to establish a paper trail to go to the VA. Active discouraging, right? And I believe that it should be a default in. You know, the default is you're enrolled in the VA. It should be an opt-in, not an opt-out. No, wait, whatever it is, it should be that. You know, you should be automatically enrolled in the VA when you get out of the military. And if you want to opt out, good. But I really don't want the DOD to get off the hook here, because this is, you know, if there's a transition problem, that means there's two places, one from where you're leaving and one from where you're going, and it can only be fixed that way. So I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I had to.
great. Chris North, who was asking some of those VHA, VBA questions, I think wants to add to that. So we'll let him ask that question, maybe do one more, and then we'll wrap things up. So Chris, go for it. Chris, you there?
I think if Chris isn't saying anything, Paul Sullivan did want to jump in.
If I may, just to add on to what Suzanne said, the first step toward a broader transition happened in 1998 with the passage of the Persian Gulf Veterans Act that I helped write and pass. That law provided 2 years of free care for any service member who went to a war zone, and the veteran had to assert that the medical condition where they were seeking treatment at VA was related to their service, which was an incredibly low bar. Based on VA claim backlog of problems, starting with the second invasion of Iraq in 2003, VBA was flooded with claims. And I met with some senators from both Republicans and Democrats, and that 2 years of free care based on advocates presenting evidence of problems among veterans was increased to 5 years. And one area where it's really, really important to have a strong connection between the military and VA, and then have a strong connection within VA for both VHA and VBA, is for mental health. We want veterans who are having a mental health condition to know they can pick up the phone and call VA's crisis line and get care, that they can call and get an appointment right away, sometimes through the crisis line, because there's this window where if a veteran can get care right away when they're presenting with some serious mental health conditions, their life can be saved or dramatically improved. And we really want to make sure that everybody understands that. And then to flip everything on its head, the military did do one good thing, Suzanne, if I may, and that's because of Secretary Principi's Seamless Transition Task Force that I sat on and wrote the report for in 2004. And the VA did a good job for a very small percentage of the discharging service members. It made sure that the VA that there was a benefits person and a healthcare person at Walter Reed or at Bethesda when they both existed, so that that person would receive hands-on transition. And there were advocates within VA who were saying this should be broadened to everyone, not just the very seriously ill. But it all came down to the issue of money and then staffing and then training. There is a political will for some people to want to make this happen. The question is turning that into a reality. And if at the end of the day, we want to make sure that every veteran mental health condition or physical health condition gets care right away, we want to improve the transition from DOD to VA and the communication between VBA and VHA.
I think that's a great place to end. We could, I mean, this is such a complicated and rich issue, and we will revisit it. And we are really happy that we're dealing with this issue. We feel that, you know, in spite of its problems, the Veterans Health Administration offers some of the best healthcare in the country. I wish I could get it. I can't, and I certainly want my friends to get it, but we can't have a broken door. And, you know, I listened to you, Paul and Mo and Isam and Elliot, and it strikes me that, you know, this is such a setup for people to hate government, to hate the VA, to fight, you know, to think privatization is the solution. Of course, as we saw with Isam and with all of it, privatization, you know, you're going from, you are not going from one imperfect system to a perfect system. You're going from, you know, corporatization light to, when we have these problems, to corporatization heavy. And we really feel that this needs to be addressed. We will be doing more of these forums. We will be preparing some big reports on the VBA with Paul Sullivan's help and other people. And, you know, we would love it if you like these forums to think about going to our new exciting website, which was redesigned by Isam Attia, who's not only a great and eloquent veteran, but an amazing visual artist. And if you would like to visit the website, veteranspolicy.org, and if you'd like to click donate, whether it's, you know, $5, $25, $3 million, anybody who has that will take it. We would invite you to donate so we can continue our work. And Jasper, do you want to maybe say something in conclusion?
Yeah, no, just would reiterate what you said. Thanks to everybody for coming. We really appreciate it. I put the email address down in the chat, which is execdirector@veteranspolicy.org. If people have follow-up questions, I'm happy to help answer those, connect with experts, you know, help people out. So yeah, visit the website, and thanks so much for taking the time today. We really appreciate it. We know VBA is very confusing, very complex. We're all trying to better figure it out, but it's vital work. And so we thank all of the guests today for helping us clarify this issue.